in 35 years when half of this country are folk of color, half are white. Ask yourself one fundamental question. Is it possible for such a place to be a healthy and productive society for anybody of color or white when half of the population, that half of color, is twice as likely to be unemployed as the white half? 3 times as likely to be poor as the white half. Have 1/10 the net worth on average of the white half. 9 years less life expectancy on average as that of the white half. Double the rate of infant mortality, double the rate of low birth weight children born to mothers in that community relative to the white half. Ask yourself how a society like that survives. And if you believe it can, stick around and you will be disabused of that notion with a vengeance. I promise you. So on an ethical and a practical level, one has to grapple with these issues. Right now, just so we know the legacy and what it has wrought, the median family in the white community in this country, so the midpoint family, right, has 11 times the net worth of the median African American family, 8 times the net worth of the median Latino family. It's not because we have worked harder. It's not because we have prayed harder. And surely it is not because white folks possess some superior investment wisdom about which people of color are lacking. If we have learned nothing in the last 3 years or so of global economic meltdown, perhaps we could at least learn this one thing, and that is that a handful of very wealthy white dudes are capable of losing a hell of a lot of money without any help from black people, without any help from Mexican folk, without any help from Asian American folk, Pacific Islanders, Native North Americans, with no people of color in the bunch. Just a handful of white men, can't even put it on all white folks, just a handful of really rich, really powerful white dudes who are the smartest guys in the room to hear them tell it. Because they work on Wall Street. They move money around, which takes no frickin' skill at all. And they don't even do that well. That's how they lost all of it. Selling things like derivatives, which, do you know what a derivative is? No, you don't. Neither do they. That's why they lost so much damn money. Derivative is like, it's an economic tool that amounts to placing a bet on your bet. On your bet, on your bet, on your bet. Betting that your bet is going to go south and your bet is going to go north. This is all really cool if it's like in the basement of your fraternity and you're playing for beer. But when it is a global economy and you're playing with other people's money and their retirement funds and their pensions and their livelihoods, it ain't funny anymore. And here's what's interesting. This handful of rich white men, you know what they just lost in the last 3 to 4 years? $12 trillion worth of wealth wiped off the balance sheets of this country's economy. 20% of the accumulated wealth of the United States, accumulated since the founding of the country, gone in approximately 3 to 4 years because of the actions of not people of color now. Black and brown folk don't have access to $12 trillion damn dollars. If they did, we wouldn't be having this conversation. 12 trillion! And yet we are more afraid of a black or brown young man crossing the street in a hoodie than we are rich white men driving around in their Lexuses, or maybe the proper word is Lexi. I don't know the plural form. But the point is, we are less afraid of those doing the damage than we are the usual suspects. Why? Because that is the legacy that we have inherited. See, we inherit that. We didn't create that stereotype. We didn't create that system of fear, but now here we are living with it. It would take half a damn millennium for black and brown street thugs to steal that much damn money. They would have to have their hand in your pocket round the clock, man. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days out of the year, just hand in the pocket, hand in the pocket, hand in the pocket. Are you done stealing from me yet? Hell no. I got more to take. More. I'm not taking a break to eat. I'm not taking a break to sleep. I'm not even going to take a break to pee. I'm just going to keep robbing you. And 500 years later, they still wouldn't have $12 trillion to show for it. So what does this mean? You see, it means that this disparity that we see has very little to do with merit. Hell, if it did, folks that have a lot of merit don't lose $12 trillion. Don't engage in the kind of speculative financial activity that can wipe out a global economy. That ain't evidence of a real high IQ. And if it is, that's just more evidence that real high IQ doesn't mean very much in the real world. We don't want to talk about any of this as a society. In fact, we are told we ought not talk about it. We're told that to talk about it is to make the problem worse. Oh, if you talk about racism, that's what causes racism. I mean, that's what people say. Now, there's not another social problem on the planet that we'd say that about. Like, try to imagine that being said about any other problem, like world hunger. Well, I know that's a problem, but if we would just stop talking about it, food would miraculously appear on the plates of the hungry. It would make no damn sense. Or crime. Oh, I know crime's a bad problem, but I got a solution. Just don't talk about it. Nobody will ever get carjacked again. Right? That's like blaming the speedometer for the speeding ticket that you just got. Right? Speeding ticket is not caused, and the speeding was not caused by the speedometer. The speedometer just told you what the hell happened. And that's what the conversation that we need to be having about this legacy tells us. We talk about what happened, but we're not supposed to, because folks say, well, you just can't live in the past. You know, at some point you just have to move on. Right? Can't live in the past. This is the 21st century, by God. Which, you know, I thought it was too, but then folks started calling themselves the Tea Party, and that's some really old-ish, pardon the expression. So I'll be more than happy to stop living in the past, you know, when they do. That July 4th thing is about some really old stuff too. That fireworks thing, that breaking away from the British, that happened like a really long ass time ago. So maybe we ought to move on from that. But no, that would be unpatriotic. That would be un-American. That means I hate America if I say that. See, that's the problem. We are right now engaged, and please do not underestimate the truth of what I'm about to say. We are engaged in a battle for the narrative of this country, not just for the physical land and who can be here and who can't be, the war with regard to the border and who's going to be allowed in and under what terms. That's one piece of the battle, but the other piece is we got folks saying, well, if we can't control the border, by God, we will control the story. We will control the narrative. We will tell you what America is. First off, we will tell you that an entire continental shelf is just our country by calling it America. That's number one. Then number two, we will tell you what aspects of the story are real and worth remembering. So in Texas, we got folks trying to rewrite textbooks to their liking. Now understand, it's not just a Texas problem, because Texas happens to be the largest school textbook market in the country. So whatever the folks in Texas end up recommending and then pushing for, that's what the publishers churn out, because there's money to be made. And then whatever the publishers churn out, that's what folk in California get stuck with too. And that's what folks in Arizona get stuck with, and New Mexico get stuck with, and Maine and Florida, everywhere else, right? So they're trying to rewrite these textbooks to take out the stuff they don't like. Now, not one of these people on the rewrite committee actually has a history degree. Not one. But they got a whole bunch of ideas in their head that they'd like to try out. Among them, let's remove Thurgood Marshall from the textbook, because why do we need to know about him? Yes, he was the lead attorney in Brown v. Board. Yes, he was the first African-American Supreme Court justice. But we don't need to have him. Cesar Chavez, why do we need to have him? Dolores Huerta, why do we need to have her? But we do need Rush Limbaugh. And we do need Jerry Falwell. And we do need Phyllis Schlafly, who led the fight against the Equal Rights Amendment. We need more time for cultural conservatives, less time for civil rights legends. And when it comes to talking about the slavery trade, we shouldn't even call it the slave trade. We should call it the triangular trade. Because there were three things being traded, and it was like a triangle on the map. And so we'll just ignore the fact that it was mostly about human beings being sold into chattel. And sold into bondage. They wanted to change that. That actually got voted down, thank God. They lost on that one. But they won on some of those others. Right? They also wanted to take Thomas Jefferson out. Now, this is especially interesting. There are lots of reasons not to like Thomas Jefferson, like the fact that he said he thought we should hunt all indigenous people to the ends of the earth until they were exterminated. Right? That's sort of bad, but that's not what bothered them. And the fact that he said horrible things about African-American folks, and particularly about the physical beauty or lack thereof of black people in his notes on the state of Virginia. He said all kinds of racist things, owned human beings, lots of reasons not to like Jefferson, but none of that stuff bothered the folks in Texas. What bothered them is that he was insufficiently committed to the creation of a Christian republic. Because indeed, Jefferson was pretty much an agnostic. I mean, he actually wrote his own Bible. He had went in and just rewrote the Bible to suit his own purposes. That was the kind of guy he was. They don't like that because they believe that this was intended to be a Christian republic in the most narrow, evangelical, and absurd sense of that word, right? And because Jefferson disagreed, we'll leave him out. Right? In Arizona, they're going one step further, trying to ban entire classes that deal with these kinds of subjects. Ethnic studies under fire in Tucson, for instance. And the Tucson Unified School District is a district that I've worked in and with. I've worked with some of those students in the La Raza Studies program, which is essentially Chicano studies, or to some extent broader Latino studies. It's not only for Chicano students or Latino students. Anyone can enroll. Now, it does happen to be the case that about 1,700 students in the program, the vast majority of whom are Chicano students, but that's because they find an interest in the curriculum. It's geared toward their life. It's trying to make that curriculum relevant to their experience. And you know what? It's an incredible program. Before the creation of that program in the TUSD, the rate at which Latino and Chicano students in particular were going to college coming out of that district was like 17%. Those students who go through that program have a rate of going on to college of 72%. Right? So it's a program that works in a district where nothing else was reaching these kids. But to the people who were attacking the program and trying to get it defunded and essentially stopped, none of that matters. Because if you teach, why? Here's what they say. If you teach these kids in the La Raza Studies program about what's been done to their people, they'll hate white folks. Fascinating. Notice, they're not accusing the program of lying about anything. Right? It's not as if they're saying they're making up history and they're going to hate white people for no good reason if we teach them that. No. They're admitting that the history's right. They just don't think we ought to talk about it. So we can't talk about the fact that this country stole half of Mexico in a war of aggression that we started on false pretense. Right? As if Chicano students don't know that. Right? We can't talk about the fact that in the 30s this country expelled 600,000 Mexican-American citizens of the United States. Sent them back across a border they'd never crossed in the first place. They were citizens of the country, and they were expelled to make way for white workers who had lost their jobs in the Depression. Most of us haven't even learned that history. It's not taught in school, but it's true. 500,000 more who were guest workers were also expelled. So over 1 million total Latino folks sent away in a wave of anti-immigrant hysteria. See, some stuff isn't new, right? But we can't talk about that because then they'll hate white folks. That's a very selective use of historical memory and a very selective use or a very selective concern about, we can't teach about injustice because then the people who are the victims will hate the victimizers. I don't think that's going to mean that we're going to stop teaching about the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Right? I don't think they're going to say, we got to talk about World War II, but we got to leave out the whole part where we got bombed because somebody might decide they hate the Japanese. Oh no, we're going to talk about that. Are you kidding? Because that pain counts, you see. They're not going to refuse to talk about September 11th of 2001, are they? Are they going to not teach about that? Because, if we talk about 9/11, some folks might hate Arabs and some folks might hate Muslim folks, Arab or not. We know that's happened. We know that there are people who have used 9/11 as an excuse to justify their Islamophobia, which they were already rocking long before September 11th. But you think we're not going to talk about that? We're not going to teach about 9/11? Oh, no, hell no. We're going to teach about it every day forever. Find the pain that counts. And so really what these folks are saying, that we don't want to get stuck in the past. They love to stay in the past when it's a past that venerates them, when it's a past that elevates them, when it's a past that allows them to claim this mantle of American exceptionalism, that allows them to believe that this country above all others was struck off from the literal forehead of God Almighty. But if it's a past that brings us up a little bit short, right? If it's a past that exposes the underbelly of all that, right? The less palatable side of all that, that's the only part that they want to ignore. If they can't control the demographics, they will control, or at least they hope to control, the narrative. It's interesting to hear folks who say they don't want to live in the past, however, not only creating something they call the Tea Party, but more importantly, saying, as they do now quite loudly, that they want to, quote, take their country back. Find the pain that counts. And so really what these folks are saying, that we don't want to get stuck in the past. They love to stay in the past when it's a past that venerates them, when it's a past that elevates them, when it's a past that allows them to claim this mantle of American exceptionalism, that allows them to believe that this country above all others was struck off from the literal forehead of God Almighty. But if it's a past that brings us up a little bit short, right? If it's a past that exposes the underbelly of all that, right? The less palatable side of all that, that's the only part that they want to ignore. If they can't control the demographics, they will control, or at least they hope to control, the narrative. It's interesting to hear folks who say they don't want to live in the past, however, not only creating something they call the Tea Party, but more importantly, saying, as they do now quite loudly, that they want to, quote, take their country back.